Hey, did you know that Africa is splitting? Yes, that's right. Imagine a crack so big that, in the future, it could separate the African continent into two parts and even create a new ocean. It sounds like something out of a movie, right? But this is actually happening in southeastern Kenya, in a region called the Rift Valley. Let's take a closer look at what's going on there. The Rift Valley is a giant crack that stretches for about 3,000 kilometers, crossing countries like Somalia, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Kenya, and Zimbabwe. This crack is not just a crack in the ground. It is literally dividing the African tectonic plate into two parts, the Somali plate and the Nubian plate. These plates are slowly moving apart, and this movement could one day form a gigantic ocean in the middle of the continent. But what are these tectonic plates, anyway? Well, think of the Earth's crust as a giant jigsaw puzzle. The pieces of this puzzle are the tectonic plates, which float on the Earth's mantle, a very hot and viscous layer, full of magma. Sometimes these plates move and create incredible things like mountains, volcanoes, and of course, giant cracks like the Rift Valley. Now, the most interesting thing, this division is not something that happens overnight. We are talking about millions of years. For now, the Rift Valley is a silent process, but it already shows clear signs that Africa is changing. The ground in the region, for example, is covered by volcanic rocks, which indicates that the Earth's crust there is very thin, so thin that it is about to break in some places. When this happens, an ocean will begin to form, and in the distant future, Africa will be smaller and will have a giant island in the Indian Ocean. Now tell me, isn't it crazy to think that the continent we live in is changing like this? And look, it's not the first time this has happened. Remember that 138 million years ago, Brazil and Africa were stuck together? Well, they separated through the same process. So, the next time you hear about tectonic plates or see images of large cracks in the ground, you'll know that these are signs that the Earth is alive and constantly changing. Impressive, right? What did you think of this Rift Valley story? Did you imagine that the African continent could split like this? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your opinion. After learning about the crack that is dividing Africa, let's cross the ocean and talk about another area that messes with the Earth and with people's minds. We are in California, in the United States, where one of the most famous geological faults in the world is located, the San Andreas Fault. This fault is practically a dividing line between two tectonic plates, the North American plate and the Pacific plate. And do you know what is most fascinating? These plates are constantly rubbing, pushing, and locking against each other. It is as if two giant people were playing arm wrestling, except instead of arms, we are talking about gigantic pieces of the planet. But unlike the Rift Valley, where everything happens very slowly, here things are much more agitated. The San Andreas Fault is known for causing earthquakes. You may have seen films that show California shaking all over, with buildings shaking, streets splitting in half, and people running in all directions. Yes, this may seem exaggerated, but the danger is real. The southern part of the fault, near Los Angeles, has been building up tension for more than 300 years. The longer that energy is trapped, the greater the impact when it is released. Experts say the risk of a major earthquake in the region is increasing. It's not a question of if it will happen, but when. And when it does, it could cause one of the largest earthquakes ever recorded. That's why many people in California are always prepared. Buildings are built to withstand earthquakes, schools teach people how to protect themselves, and people keep emergency kits in their homes. Buildings are built to withstand earthquakes, schools teach people how to protect themselves, and people keep emergency kits in their homes. Did you know that during an earthquake, the safest place to be is under a table or a door? It seems simple, but it can save lives. And what causes these earthquakes? When the tectonic plates move, they become locked at certain points along the fault. The tension builds up like a rope being pulled as tight as it can go. When it can't hold any longer, the energy is released all at once, and the ground begins to shake. This is what we call an earthquake. Oh, and there's more. The San Andreas Fault isn't just a line on the map. It runs for about 1,300 kilometers, cutting California almost in half. You can even see this fault from space. Isn't it incredible to think that the planet has such gigantic and visible cuts? And did you know that an earthquake could happen at any time in this region? How would you react if the ground started shaking right under your feet? Comment below. I want to know what you think about all this. After exploring the busy San Andreas Fault, we headed north along the Pacific coast between the United States and Canada. Here, there's a threat that's not as easily seen as a crack in the earth. We're talking about the Cascadia subduction zone, a fault line that's submerged under the ocean floor. Unlike the San Andreas, where the plates slide side by side, in Cascadia, they're in direct confrontation. The Pacific plate is slowly diving beneath the North American plate. This movement is like a constant silent push, building up an impressive amount of energy. And when that energy is released, the impact can be devastating. Experts believe that this fault is capable of producing gigantic earthquakes with a magnitude of 9 or more. To give you an idea, such a tremor would be dozens of times stronger than the common earthquakes we've heard of. In addition, seismic shocks in the Cascadia region often trigger tsunamis, those huge waves that can travel kilometers inland and cause incredible damage. And what has scientists even more alert? Recently, a peculiar liquid was identified being released by this fault. It is like a natural lubricant that reduces friction between the plates, but it could also be a sign that something is moving down there. This liquid could be indicating that the zone is setting the stage for a major event. The last time Cascadia released all its energy was more than 300 years ago, in 1700. At the time, there was no technology to monitor the event, but historical records and indigenous legends speak of land sinking and giant waves hitting the coasts. Scientists have even found evidence that this earthquake caused a tsunami that traveled as far as Japan. That if you live near the coast, did you know that there are warning signs of a tsunami? One of them is when the sea suddenly recedes, leaving the beach completely dry. When this happens, it is time to run to higher ground as quickly as possible. Did you know that cities and towns on the Pacific coast already have evacuation plans and sirens installed to alert people? It's a race against time to ensure that when the next major event happens, as many lives as possible are saved. What would it be like to live in an area where the land and sea can change the fate of everything around you in a matter of minutes? Would you feel safe with so many emergency plans in place, or would you still be worried? Did you know that the coldest continent on the planet also has some of the most impressive cracks on Earth? Let's go straight to Antarctica, where the Larsen Sea ice shelf is causing a stir. This icy place hides a crack that has already reached an impressive 175 kilometers in length. And do you know what's even more curious? This fissure could generate a gigantic iceberg with an area so large that it's almost the size of the federal district. Can you believe it? What's happening there is a natural phenomenon, but it worries scientists around the world. When the crack finally breaks, it won't be enough to cause a direct rise in sea level, since the ice on the shelf is already floating in the ocean. However, there's a catch to all this. The detachment of such a huge iceberg could destabilize the glaciers in the region. And then, yes, the problem becomes more serious. When the support of these floating platforms is lost, the glaciers on the continent could start to slide more quickly into the ocean. This means that the melting of the polar ice caps could accelerate, contributing to rising sea levels in many parts of the world. Have you considered the consequences for coastal regions? Researchers monitoring Larsen Sea hope that when the fissure finally releases the iceberg, a unique opportunity for study will arise. Beneath the ice sheet lies a virtually untouched ecosystem that may hide marine species never before seen. Isn't it incredible to think that, even in the midst of such a worrying event, science still finds room for fascinating discoveries? So, what do you think? Will we see this iceberg form in the coming years? In the meantime, it's a reminder of how dynamic our planet is, even in its coldest and most remote corners. Speaking of natural phenomena that are shaping our planet, volcanic cracks deserve special mention, especially in the regions of Hawaii, Mexico, and the United States. Have you ever heard of crack in the ground or the fissures that appear in Hawaii? These cracks are caused by intense volcanic activity, such as the eruption of the Kilauea volcano, which is constantly altering the local landscape. But what happens in these places? Cracks appear when magma, that hot material that comes from deep within the earth, finds its way to the surface. During eruptions, the magma moves and the Earth's crust breaks, creating fissures. The most impressive thing is that over time, these cracks end up creating new land. It is as if the planet is constantly reinventing itself. Volcanic islands, such as those in Hawaii, grow and expand due to these processes, forming new parts of land in the middle of the ocean. Hawaii, for example, is literally expanding. Every time a volcano erupts, it contributes to the creation of new land areas, making the archipelago even larger. These eruptions also help to form the rich local biodiversity, with new species that begin to adapt to these newly created lands. Interesting, isn't it? Volcanic activity is one of the main causes of land creation and destruction around the world. With each crack or eruption, the planet takes on new forms, and we, as observers, can see how the Earth continues to evolve. Well, if you're curious about how our planet is always in motion, keep an eye on volcanic cracks and the power of the volcano. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed learning a little more about these incredible geological changes. See you in the next video.